The movement Stop Killing Games has reached a pretty big milestone this last week when it was able to get enough signatures to be seen in front of the European Commission, and that is having 1 million signatures on their complaint. And I'm not super familiar when it comes to European law, so I had to kind of look up what this all means. And effectively, it means that they get to present their case in front of the European Commission. Now, that's not to say that there's going to do anything about it. They could just hear out the case and then just kind of dismiss it entirely, or they could actually continue on with it and possibly pass some laws in the future. So we don't know right now, but the fact that they actually get to present it in front of them is a pretty big deal right now. And for people who aren't really familiar with what's going on, I got the official website pulled up for Stop Killing Games, and this is what they have to say and what their goal ultimately is. And when I was looking at this, it's like, for the most part, I can agree with what they're trying to do. I personally might have some reservations on how they're going about doing things. I'll get to those later on in the video, but first let's look at what they have to say and then look at the response from some of the game developers, because since they were able to get their 1 million signatures, some game developers are now starting to speak out on this, and it seems to me that they're a little bit worried that something might happen to them, or something might force their hand. Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement started to challenge the legality of publishers destroying video games they have sold to customers. An increasing number of video games are sold effectively as goods with no stated expiration date, but designed to be completely unplayable as soon as support from the publisher ends. This practice is a form of planned obsolescence and is not only detrimental to customers, but makes preservation effectively impossible. Furthermore, the legality of this practice is largely untested in many countries. And then they go on to talk about some of the things that they've actually been able to accomplish in other countries, and saying if you want to get involved, you can sign this petition. So you can check this out. I'll leave a link to this website in the description of the video if you want to check it out yourself, if you're so inclined and you live in the EU and happen to see this. But like I said, I like the idea about what they're doing, because I think it is kind of bad when you have developers producing games that they know that requires their constant support, and if they stop supporting the game, or if something happens with the company, well, then people who previously bought the game are no longer going to have access. I've talked about this in many forms when it comes to video games or any other type of media. I always advocate for people to buy physical media whenever possible, but this is kind of going a step beyond that, because when it comes to like a movie, for instance, if you want to buy a digital copy of a movie on whatever platform you want to buy it on, like Amazon, for instance, but if you for some reason lose your account or get your account banned or what have you, or if they just remove it from Amazon entirely, well, then you no longer have access to that. That's why I say buy physical movies, because then you can never get that taken away from you unless you actually lose the physical copy of the disc. But when it comes to video games, it's a whole other thing, because there's really no such thing when it comes to a lot of newer games as a physical copy. Because even when you buy a physical copy of mini games, especially if it's even if it's not an online game, but when you buy mini games, it's not necessarily the disc is what lets you play the game. It's basically a key that allows you to download the game on whatever console. Gone are the days where you have like a Super Nintendo system and then you have the actual cartridge where you can pop the cartridge in decades later. I mean, I still have a Super Nintendo and games for that. I can put those games in and still play 30-year-old games just fine, just so long as the copy itself and the console itself are working. It's not the same when it comes to a lot of other physical games, especially when it comes to games that are online games. Then at that point, you need to have a lot of other external servers working in order to allow you to play that game. A lot of these game developers, they'll create new games like that, and then after a while, they'll stop all support for them, and the people who bought those games are no longer allowed to play, even if they want to. Game developers have tried to argue that this is just the way the business is working these days, and they try to give people plenty of time to know that, like, hey, we're going to be shutting off support for these games. Now, that's not always the case, how things go. If you recall when Concord came out, I know that was a terrible game that most people didn't play, but there were still some people out there who did enjoy the game, however few they were. And they cut off support to that game like a month after the game finally came out. It was like 2 weeks after the game came out that they announced, like, okay, we're going to cut down, so we're going to shut off support for the game in a couple weeks. So people paid good money. I don't believe it was full retail, but they paid good money for that game, even if you bought a physical copy of the game. And then you could play it for a month, and that was it. Now, I'm sure if there were people knew that they were not going to be able to play it a month after buying it, then they probably would have reevaluated their choice whether or not they wanted to essentially rent the game for a month. But even if it was longer than a month, still a lot of these developers present it as if you're buying a copy of the game, and that's not what you're doing. You're basically just renting a copy. Behind the scenes, or when pushed on this matter, they try to say like, oh no, this is essentially what it is. You're just paying a licensing fee to play the game, but they're always trying to present the dough to the public as you're actually buying the game until you start pushing back on them on this matter. A European game publisher group response to Stop Killing Games claims these proposals would curtail developer choice. Video Game Europe voices opposition to Stop Killing Games movement as it clears a threshold to become an EU citizens initiative. So a representative for many game developers, this is speaking on this matter. This is what they have to say about it. This weekend, the Stop Killing Games movement reached a critical milestone to become a European citizen initiative, but not everyone is on board. Video Games Europe, a trade association representing game developers and publishers in the EU, released a statement on Friday pushing back against Stop Killing Games. Video Game Europe said in a statement, "We appreciate the passion of our community. However, the decision to discontinue online services is multifaceted, never taken lightly, and must be an option for companies when an online experience is no longer commercially viable. We understand that it can be disappointing for players, but when it does happen, the industry ensures that players are given fair notice." Fair notice is a subjective term. Like I said, sometimes it could be a couple years notice or a year notice. Other times it could just be a couple weeks. When it does happen, the industry ensures that players are given fair notice of this prospective changes in compliance with local consumer protection law. So they're trying to do the bare minimum as far as consumer protection laws in order to pass this. So it's because of that perhaps they could get away with this and ultimately nothing will transpire, but still it is pretty bad in my opinion that they can actually sell a product or present it as they're selling a product, and it can ultimately go away with very little notice, even if they say it's fair notice or it's legally allowed fair notice. Still, I don't like the idea that you could buy something and you're not allowed to play it sometime down the road. Like I said, I still like playing games that are decades old at this point, and as long as I have a physical copy of it in a console, I'm allowed to play it. That's no longer the case when it comes to many newer games, and if something like this actually does get passed where companies are no longer allowed to do that, then that probably would change the whole landscape when it comes to video games. And I think that's why a lot of these companies are worried about it. I mean, that's not even speculation, I suppose. That's pretty much what they've even saying. Private servers are not always a viable alternative option for players, as the protection we put in place to secure player data, remove illegal content, and combat unsafe community content would not exist and would leave rights holders liable. Yeah, I mean, I think there is some truth to that. In addition, many titles are designed from the ground up to be online only, and I think that's something that a lot of people are kind of rejecting, and while they're wanting because there's some games I can understand are online only, but there's many games out there that really don't need to be online only, but they're still doing it anyway because it's more profitable for them, as opposed to just putting out a single player game or something like that you can play offline and you can just play through a physical copy. In effect, these proposals would curtail developer choice by making these video games prohibitively expensive to create. We welcome the opportunity to discuss our position with policymakers and those who have led the European Citizens Initiative in the coming months. So it looks like they're willing to actually come to the negotiating table on this one, or at least that's what they're saying right here, and discuss what could be done in the future in order to make both sides happy. But I think they're really just trying to protect video game developers on this one, because like I said, it's more lucrative for them to produce the games how they currently are online only, than they can just shut off support down the road and move on to the next thing right now. Meanwhile, gamers themselves are not liking the idea that what they're buying could just be torn away, not to mention the whole preservation aspect of it, where there's something, if they're kind of referring to it as a piece of artwork, a video game, just being able to remove it entirely from the world where it's no longer able to be consumed again. Well, there is something sad about that. But one of my big reservations about this, though, because if I was just to pick a side, I'm on the side of the stop killing games, where it's like, I do not like the idea that game developers can take something. If you bought something, even if it's a digital copy of something like that, I don't like the idea that it can be removed from you. But still, since that's the world we live in, that's why I choose to buy physical copies of things whenever possible. But I am sympathetic to the idea that like something needs to be done to keep developers from doing this sort of thing. However, where I kind of hesitate, though, is offering the EU to be the ones to determine what needs to be done, or they're the ones who decide what's going to happen here, because I think it's kind of a bad omen when you allow a government, especially one as tyrannical as the EU, to try to step in and be like, okay, we're leaving it up to you to decide what happens, and we're going to invite you to create regulations on this matter. Because maybe it's just me, but I mean, I usually think whenever you're asking the government to regulate things a bit more, things just kind of go bad. But maybe just a threat of something like that happening would be enough to get the game industry to actually do something, because the whole games rating system that we currently have right now is not like an official legal thing or anything like that. That was basically just the games industry on its own deciding we need to do this because politicians were talking about regulating video games and other stuff. So they decided we're just going to regulate ourselves so we don't have the government stepping in and basically telling us what we can and cannot do in the future. So it's perhaps maybe that will happen in the future if things kind of get pushed along and the game industry gets a little bit more worried. Then they might do something on their own in order to try to prevent government overreach in this manner, because I know the EU would try to use this as an opportunity. Like, oh, we can control video games now. We can legislate video games. Okay, let's legislate video games and try to push what we want to push within this market. And I'm thinking that's something that no one on either side of this debate would be happy to have happen in this one. And so I do hope it doesn't get to that point. I think the best alternative would basically be the game developers and people behind Stop Killing Games get together and decide, okay, what can we actually do within reason to accommodate both sides, or how can we negotiate this to make something happen so that both sides are happy within this without having to have the government get involved and basically mandate something that I think will ultimately make both sides unhappy with this. But right now, if you want to do something right now besides signing the petition, you could just not support a lot of these games and a lot of these companies that are pushing these type of online only type video games, because the only reason they're doing this is because it's profitable for them as game developers. And if they weren't selling as much as those, then I think they would be producing less of them and start selling more games that people actually do want to buy. And if that's an offline ones, then that's how it is. And that's really the thing about all this too, is you try to browbeat a lot of these game developers and blame them for what's going on within the industry. And I think for the most part, they've been trying to push it in a certain direction, but at the same time, it has been working out for them from a business standpoint. So you kind of have to also blame the customer too. So it's really both sides are at fault in this manner, but as far as consumers go, they can actually stop it right now if they really wanted to. But let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Do you think the EU should be involved with it, or do you think it should be something else entirely, or do you think it's all entirely on the consumer not to buy products like this, and maybe that'll push the game industry in another direction? I'm curious what people have to say about this. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.